Hey, good morning, DeKalb County. Thank you so much for tuning in this Thursday morning at 10 o'clock. We have a special called Committee of the Whole meeting to discuss SPLOST projects. An update from our staff member, Mr. Chris Kingsbury. The intent also is after the update is to sort of get into a discussion amongst the commissioners of what we would like to see in SPLOST 2, which is the current SPLOST to be ending, I think, in 2024. If I remember correctly, and we'll need to have a plan in place before then to discuss what we expect as residents and as commissioners for DeKalb County and what improvements we'd like to see within the county. With that, I want to acknowledge my commissioners that are present, Commissioner Bradshaw, Commissioner Ted Terry, Commissioner Maria Davis Johnson, as well as Commissioner Rader. And with that, Mr. Kingsbury, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Patrick. Good morning, everyone. We'll go through this pretty quickly. I hope everyone got the slides yesterday. So we've got 10 topics on the agenda. We'll jump right into the revenue update. Everybody's always excited to know how much money have we gotten. So this is, we have 4 full years of revenue as of this report, April 1, 2018 through April 1st, 2022. So the actual sales tax collections were $271.6 million in round numbers. Projected for the same period when the program started was $264.8 in round numbers. So we've got 22 months left, and if we go a straight line, we'll be a 2% over the original projections. And interest to date's just shy of $2 million. So it's been a very healthy revenue generator for the county. Sales taxes around the metro area in general have been at or above projections. I think the other key thing from this slide to take away is 88% of the revenue we've collected to date. You all as a board have authorized the expenditures, or we're bringing to you specific budget allocation requests. And the final thing I'd like to leave you with for the revenue is, while it's been strong, it's just been a roller coaster of an economic situation. As interest rates are going up, we've got supply chain issues, the cost increases on materials, and material shortages are all impacting project delivery. That being said, those are things we're aware of, but we don't see any short-term impact to the program.
And along those lines, commissioners, I just want to add that we are in the process, not only here, but in other operational areas, putting together various contracts and the potential cost increases, the proposed cost increases, just so that we can have a view of what is happening overall in our spend and our projected spending. So to Chris's point, this is something we're tracking not only in SPLOST, but throughout the organization.
Chris, if you don't mind me throwing a quick question out there.
Yes.
I see resurfacing is going to be the next topic or the next slide. With the programs or the repaving programs that we authorized from last year, will you be talking about where they are contractually speaking?
Exactly, yes. So that's the next slide, Mr. Patrick. So briefly, y'all have probably heard we've hit a little roadblock with one of our prime consultants, a large contractor, with what we called SPLOST 2, second SPLOST contract, areas A and B. HEH was awarded their contract and went to work, knowing that the asphalt price index that GDOT keeps in place or has in place to allow contractors to adjust their billing after the contract's let to keep up with inflation, and asphalt prices really have spiked. They went to work and we're processing a change order for them. Snell, for a variety of reasons, declined to take the contract without an agreement in place. Zach and Catherine and Diane McNabb and the lawyers all got involved. It basically said, we're uncomfortable signing the contract without some commitment. You'll consider a change order. We came to terms with that letter. Then at the notice to proceed stage, when I actually got everybody in the room to sign and tell them to go to work, they said, well, we want to ask for a second increase. And that would put their bid at about 40% over their original cost. And I think two things were going on. One, they're a very large contractor. Two, they've been awarded some very large contracts from GDOT. And three, I think they just didn't feel comfortable doing the work at those. It was almost like a way to back out gracefully. So we're going to rebid that contract. So that was SPLOST 2 Area A for 25 miles. But all that being said, if you look carefully at the list, we were very lucky the first few years. The contracts we awarded the first 75 miles, the average cost per mile came in under the original estimates. The current ones are slightly over the original budgets. But that being said, even putting in a pretty hefty inflation factor, we think we're going to get about another 100 miles let. So we're at the 200-mile range now. We're going to be pretty darn close to that original 300-mile list, which actually was 338. But let's not get stuck in the details, because Peggy kept two lists, one for the high volume roads with a low rating, and so we're not going to get every road that they had in those original lists from 2017, but we're going to get pretty close, we hope.
Well, now I have a question.
Commissioner Rader.
Yes.
So did you say that this is coming at the expense of the high volume roads?
No. The high volume roads were interspersed within each of the bid documents.
Yeah,
So
Commissioner Rader, yeah. I
we
think what
didn't
he
save them for the end. But.
Yeah, he was just saying that is how it's actually 338 miles because they're interspersed.
Oh, I see, that the sum of the two.
We normally just say 300, but it's actually 300 plus.
Commissioner Terry has.
Commissioner Terry.
Yes, thank you. Just to clarify for the one paving contract, so that work is going to be, I guess work that they were going to do is going to be delayed.
We're going to rebid, yeah.
Rebid, okay.
Yeah.
Right, and the process will be, we'll bring something to the board to do that, but yeah.
Okay, but we do expect that bid to be higher than the original, just because, I mean, if they're pulling out.
Yeah, slightly higher, but HEH is a local contractor, small woman-owned business. Their prices are competitive, and we've seen some of the smaller contracts, Stewart Brothers and Baldwin Paving, have come in with low prices in other counties below Snell and C.W. Matthews and Pittman. So I think what's happening is the bigger contractors are really busy. They're giving us high bids just to show that they're not ignoring us. But if they get it, they've covered themselves. The smaller folks are a little scrappier and are willing to roll the dice. They've got lower road costs, and the asphalt increases don't hit them as hard.
And they're working on this big.
And what are just the same sort of line of questioning, I think, what I'm getting at here is there are, I guess, elements of these paving contracts that are seeing, whether they're supply chain or I guess also inflationary prices. Is that all just related to just asphalt, or is it labor, asphalt, striping? I mean, what are the elements of where the kind of the cost increases? Or
the biggest cost is the liquid asphalt component.
Okay.
So a year ago, that was about a $4.50 per ton per gallon cost. It's up to $5.50 now.
Is that a petroleum product?
Yeah, that's the core. Then labor is the second highest. Takes about a dozen people to run a paving crew. And then, of course, as you all are aware, truck drivers are hard to get. So they're paying a premium to keep those truck drivers employed. And fewer.
That's right. And we know that the mobilization line item can fluctuate greatly.
That mobilization and traffic control are where the smaller contractors tend to be a little more competitive. The larger ones tend to be a little more conservative. But interestingly enough, the most recent contract, 2021 LMIG, which has been approved by the board and is going through the paperwork to get the contract signed. We had 5 bidders. The range was $1 million apart. So all of them are pretty tight.
Okay, and then the last question on that point, Mr. Presiding Officer, is does there come a point where there's aspects of the resurfacing program that, because of the long-term needs and hopefully long-term funding that we're securing each 6 years or so, that the use of contractors becomes inefficient, and that something should be sort of baked into the operations of the government, whether it's equipment for striping or some sort of fund or something that's designed to, sort of buy things in bulk with other governments. So what is the opportunity for us to, I think the word is in-house, but maybe there's another way to sort of, consider it.
Well, it's an interesting question. So you've touched on something. My 40+ year career, the majority of the counties, when I started working with local governments, most counties had in-house paving crews. I can't think of about 10 left in the state, and they're almost all rural. And the problem when you have it in-house is it's expensive equipment to buy, expensive equipment to maintain, and you're buying smaller quantities of material from the quarries and the asphalt plants, and it's just not competitive.
We do patching now.
Yeah. Now, Peggy does have Zach, if Rick or Peggy's on the call, they do, because it's intermittent work, do the deep patching with in-house crews. But again, it's something they work around other schedules, and it's a smaller volume of work. But certainly something the county could look at, but generally very, very few major metro counties run their own operations for resurfacing.
Okay, but what about the other aspects like striping?
Again, it's specialized, and it's just hard to do yourself.
Yeah, but that's not to say, well, as we look at the impacts on the economy, the impacts the economy is currently having on us, we do have to be flexible. Right now we're not prepared to make any recommendations of insourcing work, but we will have to constantly evaluate, to your point, Commissioner Terry. And there may be some aspects, maybe the striping, of course, is maybe less expensive than well, it is. And
I wasn't suggesting that the current SPLOST would sort of be a change up, but I think Mr. Kingsbury said we're going to be talking about the next SPLOST. So I just wanted to put that out there for conversations. I think that's important if we're going to be talking about the next 6 years.
Yep.
All right.
Certainly.
You have two more questions, Commissioner.
If I may, I want to acknowledge that Commissioner Cochran-Johnson has joined us. Thank you very much for coming with us. Appreciate you being here. And then the order of hands raised, Commissioner Marita Davis-Johnson, followed by Jeff Rader, followed by Lorraine Cochran-Johnson. So go ahead, Commissioner Davis-Johnson.
Okay, good morning. Yeah, I just have a question on the roads. We know that we are not going to be able to cover all of the roads that were on the list, initially on the list. Will we get a copy of what roads will not be covered that was on the original list?
I would say at this point, it's a little early to say which ones. We've got one bid we're going to put back out on the street. We could crystal ball which roads might not make that last contract. But okay. It's a little premature to say exactly which ones, because we're going to be pretty close, Ms. Johnson.
Right, and let's take another quarter or so to look at
another
price
quarter.
Increase. Yeah, to look at price increases and so forth, and our interest earnings. So, I think what Chris is doing is just letting everyone know that we are impacted by inflationary costs, but I don't think we're at a decision point just yet.
And it's so close. Zach brings up a good point.
Our interest earnings may get us
interest, or you could supplement. The very first contract that went out was a combination of LMIG, SPLOST, and general county funds. So it could be there's enough money in the budget toward the end of the program to backstop the shortage of SPLOST dollars.
Okay, thank you.
Good question. Thanks.
All right, thank you very much, Commissioner Davis-Johnson. Commissioner Rader?
Can you tell me how long you expect to rebid the Snell contract?
No, we're going to put it back on the street. It's been so long.
No, how long will it take before we can get?
It should be on the street within a month. We're going through. We're going to make some changes to it to make it a little more competitive.
And then when do you think that it would be that they get a notice to proceed and can begin?
It takes 3 to 4 months. From today, you've got to get it back on the street. 2 to 3 weeks on the street. Get the prices in. Person goes through their review and then circulate the contracts. But it could be underway this fall.
right? Well, because obviously you get to a point to where they can't really pave in the winter, right?
Not necessarily. The plants have been running year round the last few years, and these are small jobs, so it's not, we've had a lot of paving done in December and January. The temperatures are right. It used to be, you're right, there was a time when the plants would shut down for the season, but the demand from GDOT and other large programs like yours and Winnett's has made it economical for them to keep those plants running every day of the year.
Then could you provide a list of the segments that are under that Snell contract that are being delayed?
Yeah, we're sending that out. It was area A for the contract.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Matter of fact, they're probably still on the website. You need to double check. It's pending.
All right, thank you, Commissioner Rader. Those are great questions. Those are my questions also, so thank you very much for asking them. Commissioner Cochran-Johnson.
Yes, thank you so much, Mr. Presiding Officer. Looking at the numbers, I see Mr. Kingsbury, it looks as if for standard resurfacing, we've increased almost post-pandemic by about $50,000 per mile, because I know pre-pandemic we were at about $450,000 per mile. And I'm not sure if this was said and I totally missed it, but I know that we have been resurfacing about, 100 miles was the goal, but I know that things changed, of course, during the pandemic, because there was a time we didn't do any work. But with the new price increase, did you tell us how many miles that you're expecting to resurface?
Yeah, we did not slow down during the pandemic. The paving crews, all those contracts were active. So to date, we've completed 125 miles, and we have 50 miles under contract, and the other 25 miles of Snells will be rebid. So that'll get us up to 200 miles before the end of the year. And that's what I was saying earlier, Ms. Lorraine Cochran. We're going to get close to the 300-mile target.
That's really aggressive. I was under the impression for some reason that in 2020 there was a slowdown. So it's good to know that there was not. But thank you for that confirmation. And that was my question.
All right, thank you, Commissioner Cochran-Johnson. Mr. Kingsbury, if you wouldn't mind, please continue.
Thank you. So roll on into the fire station projects. If you haven't had a chance, drive down Columbia Drive at Glenwood. Fire Station 7 is looking pretty good. The brickwork is up. It's clear to see it's a 2-story building. We're 43% through the budget, about halfway through the time. He's still on his target to finish February of 2023 to have a ribbon cutting and roll the fire trucks out of there. The other ones we have in the pipeline, we've been working with several property owners on Cowan Road area and Tucker for Fire Station 5. First property owner we contacted turned us down. Second property owner we contacted made a counteroffer that was extremely unreasonable. But interestingly enough, the first property owner sold to a local developer, and that local developer is interested in selling part of his property to us. So he is reviewing an offer as we speak.
Mr. Terry, I see you have your hand raised.
Oh yeah, I had a question about the fire station. Is now the right time?
Yep, go ahead.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. So in terms of the plans for the future fire stations, have they already been architecturally designed, or do you just find the site first and then you do that next?
So the the design we have for Fire Station 7 is considered a prototype. So we're actually site adapting that building design for the property we're going to close on any day now for Fire Station 27 in the east side of the county. So we have a prototype. We just site adapted to fit the lot. Okay.
I wanted to just sort of bring up a kind of a, sustainability point here, because one of the discussions we've been having over the last year is about installing solar panels on, DeKalb County buildings or property to generate revenue or certainly offset some utility costs for those locations. One of the best opportunities and for savings, especially over the long run, is as you're building a new building, that you go ahead and install the features that are going to, in essence, save a tremendous amount of money in terms of operating costs over the long run, which basically come down to energy efficient buildings and solar panels. I'm aware that Athens, Clark County years ago decided that all new fire stations would have solar panels. In fact, actually, some of them actually are even designed to be community centers in some situations. So I'm just curious, what is the feeling about future fire station designs? I understand there's a prototype. Does the prototype envision sustainability features like net zero construction, solar panels, and then some sort of community engagement, architectural sort of element, whether it's a meeting room or something to that effect?
Great question. Let me start at the bottom. Every fire station has a community room. I forget what the capacity is. They're fairly large. If you're familiar with Fire Station 3 in Avondale, that first floor footprint and equipment bay is the same as Fire Station 7. The prototype we had of a second floor to address the needs of the fire department on health and safety issues. They're not LEED certified buildings, but they're LEED considered. We've tried to be as energy conscious as possible with the lighting systems and so forth, HVAC controls. Solar panels on the roof, we've not looked at that. We certainly can circle back and look at what the feasibility is. There are a few unique roof features with skylights in the equipment bay and the hose drying apparatus that is in the tower that may hinder our ability to put solar panels on the building. But we can look at that while we're going through the redesign, site adapt for 27.
Just to follow up there, the community, so every fire station has a community room?
Correct.
Okay, but are they being used by the community?
Yeah, I think Chief Fulham's staff could give you a breakdown. I know I've had community meetings at the fire station in Avondale. City Hall's had folks meet over there when the city hall's been busy. McAfee, we've had public hearings over there for the sidewalk.
Okay, all right. Well, and how many fire stations do we have?
Well, countywide, I think there's 25 active, and we're replacing 4 of those that are really old, like the Fire Station 5 and 7, and then 28 and 27 in East Side are brand new facilities to fill in service voids.
But not all of the existing have community rooms.
That's correct. Just the newer ones.
New ones. That's what. That's the clarification.
So the 2 I'm familiar with.
The prototype. Okay.
Existing are McAfee. I forget the number. Avondale number 3, and of course 7 under construction, and then thereafter will have the same first footprint.
As it relates to Commissioner Terry, I'm thinking as it relates to the solar panels, especially I'm thinking like 27, whether or not it's we could put it on the roof, but we may be able to put panels on the site.
It's a good point. Some of the sites are a little larger.
Yeah, so I'm just thinking there may be other places other than the roof membrane to.
Yeah, and I think any solar company, like just in Atlanta, you just ask them to analyze a roof for a site and they'll just give you a bid or an estimate for free. I mean, they're sort of in the business for that. So it just seems like we should just go ahead and just ask the question of, does it make sense to do solar there, and just get some, back of the napkin, numbers. But I think the bottom line I'm getting to is, we're raising the fire fund millage rate. And so we should just, as we spend money on, government buildings, especially the ones we're going to have to maintain for, the next 50 years, let's go ahead and bake into the cost, the long-term sustainability, because we will pay for those investments pretty quickly. And then for the next 30 plus years, all you simply do is change a panel out when a panel maybe doesn't work or a better panel comes online. But the idea is, once you build the infrastructure for the solar, it is one of the best investments we can make on our public facilities.
Right. Thank you, Commissioner Terry. Mr. Kingsbury, if you would proceed.
Then real briefly, to close out the fire stations, Fire Station 14 will be, we're made a proposal to the city of Stonecrest to use the front of what used to be the Southeast Athletic Complex there on Covington Highway. They're reviewing that site plan. Fire Station 16, just in the last few days, that's the West Chapel corridor. The adjacent property owner to the existing building, existing fire station, accepted our offer. So we've accepted our indicate their intent to sell to us pending our due diligence. So we're doing surveys and environmental studies right now. And then Fire Station 28, we've made them an offer based on an appraisal. They verbally came back and said they will make a counter offer and ask for some more information. So we're still negotiating with them, but we're confident we'll get to an agreement there. That's in the Klondike Road area in southeast DeKalb. Any more questions about fire stations?
I just, for clarification, there's 26 stations, 4 currently have community rooms.
They think they show up as warming centers in the winter.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All right.
Roll on over to public safety projects. The biggest one we have underway is we're actively designing the renovation of the old animal control building, which wasn't that old, at the corner of Kensington and Camp Circle. So that's the first step to decommission the Bobby Burgess building, get all the evidence storage square footage out of there into a new state-of-the-art facility with proper ventilation and shelving units and so forth, and security. Someone's Mr. Secretary, you have a question?
No, go ahead and finish the slide and I'll ask.
Okay, yeah. And then as a companion to that, we're updating the space planning needs with Chief Ramos and Mr. Lumpkin and all the folks that occupy all the operational units that are in the existing Bobby Burgess building to get the most up-to-date. They're reevaluating their programming post-COVID and trying to get a firm handle on how many people they need and how much space they need going forward as we start to consider designing a new facility for them. The courthouse parking deck design is underway. That's to rehabilitate the deck to get another couple of decades of service out of it. Major projects we completed in the public safety budget were courthouse security. The courthouse roof and chiller projects are complete, as were the new elevators. And we're in the acquisition phase to upgrade security in the lobby, working with the Sheriff's Department and the courthouse staff. And the Fire Training Academy received its final CO. They've been out there for a year, but there were some punch list items and stormwater issues that had to be resolved before we get the final CO. So that project's closed out. And the master planning for the new public safety facility will start this winter as we finish up this space needs analysis for the existing buildings and occupants. So Mr. Terry, you had a question about public safety projects?
Yeah, just a couple of questions. So I think maybe the big sort of overarching question is, I mean, since we're talking about the current SPLOST, so there are no funds set aside specifically for sustainability investments, solar, electric vehicles, energy efficiency?
No, Commissioner Terry, and when we first contemplated the SPLOST, though, we did commit to, within the design incorporating, as much as possible. But at that time, we weren't really talking about, these solar panels and things like that. So I think we started on that path, but we didn't.
Well, I do remember having a meeting in that very room you're in, CEO Williams, when I was mayor of Clarkston with CEO Thurman back when we were talking about the SPLOST all those years ago. And I raised my hand and I said, wouldn't it be great if we put solar panels in all their fire stations as we build new ones? And so I raised my hand back then and said we should do it. And I assumed that he was meeting with the mayors to get our input, but it just never was received or acknowledged. So I've been talking about it for years. So I just, I think this is an opportunity for us. I mean, I guess the next question on this slide is we're designing a renovation of the animal control building and the state-of-the-art evidence storage facility. So we're designing it. Are we looking at the next SPLOST to then pay for the renovation and building? No,
the goal, Bobby Burgess, I'll go back to some earlier presentations, I can forward them to you, is not worth renovating. It's well past its useful life. So the goal is to slowly move out, and it was a triage operation. The evidence storage had been informally added to the old building in different sections. It used to be a jail. They put some temporary metal sheds on the roof, which used to be the exercise yard. And what's happened is the square foot load of the evidence storage, depending on what the items are, for instance, firearms, start to exceed the building's load capacity. So the building
okay,
was
but
designed.
but the portion that's the design, that's a design of the animal control building.
Right,
Right, so that's a new, renovate
evidence.
the old building, to put all the evidence
Right.
storage into a new facility,
Right. It's a design of a new evidence facility.
to get it out of Bobby Burgess.
Make sense? And so
Okay, well, all right. So all right. Break it down for me. Animal control building.
what was
What's
the
happening
old
there?
animal control building?
Okay.
Okay. Will now be a
New
new
storage.
evidence storage facility. Because
Okay,
the
gotcha.
current-
All right. And so, gotcha.
And
Because that's
then
at
the
Bobby
remaining,
Burgess.
right, then the remaining operations in Bobby Burgess, we're reevaluating how many people are in the building now. And when they go to a new facility, what do they really need in terms of square footage and layout? Because there's 5 different operations over there, the helicopters, the special operations. And we have to coordinate closely. There's the 2 court facilities that are in annexes that are affixed to Bobby Burgess, and short term could possibly be made standalone buildings, but that's all sort of being mapped out as we speak.
Okay. All right. Well, that's exactly the question. So if we're designing a future building, are we considering the sustainability investments that we can make?
Certainly will, yeah. We have not quite to the design point yet. We're still sort of at that space planning schematic stage. And
Okay, is
more
that
than one
through
building.
our on-call? Because I know we have a contract for, right, through facilities for on-call
Right,
architecture.
we're using the on-call engineering firms through the facilities contracts.
Okay, all right, so can we ask them to, you know, basically
I think so.
give a,
Yeah,
you know,
certainly, when we get to that
a
point,
design
yeah.
estimate for solar electric vehicles? You know, we're already, I mean, I know we're doing several electric vehicle charging sites with the Georgia Power, you know, Public Service Commission Make Ready program.
Right. And actually, yes, the simple answer is yes. And actually, I think,
Okay.
Especially on the evidence facility, maybe whether it's solar, some sort of a backup for the HVAC and things like that, because you have to be climate controlled and things like that. So I would think it would make sense to see if we could build in something like that. For the
Well, yeah, so that's another layer, Mr. COO, because if you're talking about battery backup, the solar was not going to solar panels alone are never going to fully power a building.
Right.
It really kind of boils down to offsetting some cost, and then certain times of the day you generate, you know, enough energy maybe to sell back to the grid. But in terms of like emergency backup, then we'd be talking about, you know, major, like, you know, Tesla power walls or major battery banks, as opposed to, I think what we've been doing, which I think, you know, we should stop doing, is the diesel generators, because you know, the diesel fuel is like really bad for the environment and for air quality. So I guess maybe that's I mean, I hate to like add an additional thing here, but you know, battery backups would be a lot more expensive, but you know, would be a fair, I think, strategy also to save money on energy costs.
And I would add, as we progress with the design, these conversations, we've been having them. One of the things we're considering is, because of cost and the need to move as quickly as we can, is to have the building design to not preclude retrofitting systems later.
Stubbed out.
In the short term, we have to have a backup generator. It's going to be a diesel or natural gas operation, but there's no reason that it can't be put in such a way, designed in such a way to allow another system to come on board to supplement it.
Right.
Good points.
All right, Mr. Kingsbury, if you give me another moment, I want to acknowledge Commissioner Cochran-Johnson has her hand raised as well.
Thank you so much, Mr. Presiding Officer. I just wanted to say to Mr. Williams, as it relates to the discussion on solar and green initiatives, we have had the discussion, and I know, of course, we're having the discussion at this moment because we're discussing new buildings that are being built to ensure that we are maximizing savings by use of green energy and best practices. But please don't forget, you know, we've asked for a more comprehensive approach. And it was my understanding that you were doing the research. Of course, I know that you've met with certain players, and I don't have, it's not my intent to do any form of steering as to whom we do business with. That's the responsibility of procurement. But I don't know if this is the time. I don't want to belabor this conversation, but I'm yet to hear back in terms of where we are. because it's my understanding initially the administration was approached in 2017 about cost savings that would amount to about $5 million annually. And that would have been substantial savings over a period of time that wasn't realized because there was no action taken at that time. So I do believe that we need a comprehensive plan rather than only addressing buildings as they are being constructed.
Sure. And we'll get you an update, Commissioner. I believe the one that we're going to start on is Sam Street. I think that was the conclusion of those discussions. And I want to say I saw a document as recently as the last couple of weeks that work should be getting started, in the very near future, because we're about to issue the CO, I think. I mean, we've issued the CO, but we're about to be fully occupied. But I'll get you an update.
Thank you.
All right. And Mr. Matowski, I see we have the hand raised of Dr. Alice White-Bussey.
Yes, Dr. Bussey is on the SPLOST Advisory Committee.
Okay. Dr. Bussey, do you have a quick question or comment?
And Dr. Bussey, I am sending you an invite to start your audio and video if you would like. Dr. Bussey?
Can you hear me now?
We can.
I wanted to add to the discussion about the Burgess building. As a participant on the Citizen Review Committee that helped establish the SPLOST, we did a special visit as part of our deliberation, the whole team, to that building and the fire station. And one of the things that stood out was that once you approach the entrance to the Burgess building, the smell of the drugs and the lack of proper storage for those drugs, evidence in the evidence room, was one of the highlights that I wanted to make sure in this discussion, how that was taken care of for the employees who had to work around in that area, as well as for the visitors to the building. And I did not get a good understanding of, in this discussion, how that is being taken care of, the evidence that the county has to protect the citizens as well as the employees.
All right, well, thank you very much for those, for that comment. Mr. Kingsbury, if you could be sure that is a component of your discussions when designing.
Yeah, I think Zach's going to chime in. The new building specifically has HVAC systems dedicated to that, to solve that very problem.
Right. And so, so the point, Dr. Bussey, is that evidence room will be moved. No longer will it be at Bobby Burgess. It will be its own separate dedicated facility, which will have sufficient air filtration and such. And that new location will be what was once the animal shelter. The old abandoned animal shelter will be made into that new facility.
All right. Well, thank you very much for that, Zach. Mr. Kingsbury, if you would continue on.
And I would very briefly to respond to Mr. Terry, we did do an analysis when we looked at new buildings versus old buildings, and given the relative newness, so to speak, of the animal control building as a shell and a foundation, there's an energy saving component to being able to reuse a building versus starting from scratch. So that's something the county can get credit for as you go forward and do those lead analysis. Next slide, very briefly. The libraries didn't have a lot of money in the current SPLOST. Their three biggest priorities were the dumbwaiter elevator to handle books at their central library and offices in Decatur. We put that in the first year. We've been able to use some of the SPLOST money to augment state funds they get for roof renovations. And because most of the libraries were pushing 30 plus years old, I worked on some of them back in the bond program in 1987. It was time to redo all the restrooms to upgrade. It become worn out, and energy saving fixtures and ADA compliance. So these libraries on the slide are all the contracts have been awarded, and construction will start this summer. at Chamblee, Clarkston, Decatur, Flat Shoals, Gresham, Lithonia, Redan, and Wesley Chapel. And I meant to put a little picture here. If you're familiar with going past a movie set and seeing those fancy portable toilets with the air conditioning units on top, we'll have those. As we renovate the restroom libraries, we'll have state-of-the-art portable restrooms out front for the patrons while the library's restrooms are out of commission.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Mr. Kingsbury. Commissioner Terry, I'm going to try and do some mind reading. I think you're going to ask about solar panels on the new library. I'll turn the floor over.
No, I'm going to ask about waterless urinals.
Even better.
You know, we have obviously we're spending a lot of money on water and sewer. And so, you know, capacity is an issue everywhere. I know it is in Clarkston. So, you know, to me, there's no reason why we would not go to waterless urinals. It's every sort of major new, you know, corporation. If you go to their fancy new buildings, that's sort of part of their energy and water savings sort of package. So sustainability is a holistic thing, right? It can be water sustainability. We've been talking about, you know, we're talking ops today about library landscape sustainability. You know, the trend and the theme here that I want to just kind of get us in the mindset of is that if we do sustainability, we help our environment, but we also help our pocketbooks, our budgets. And I just want to point out that I think it was maybe just a couple of years ago, the policy changed where each department now has to pay their power bill. I assume they're also paying their own water bill as well. And so any opportunities for departments within their own facilities or operations to save money on their operating costs, I assume means they have more money to put into programs or to other important, you know, investments. So just on the small issue of restroom renovations, wouldn't a waterless urinal help save a little bit of money on the water bill?
Yes and no. I'll get back to you with the details. The waterless urinals work very well in, lack of a better term, high volume locations. And the libraries, the urinals, we don't think meet that criteria. So they're going to be very low flow. So basically, they're automatic. The patron won't flush, and it won't flush at every use, if that makes sense. It's sort of on a cycle to rinse itself, which is, it's sort of a hybrid, and a lot of buildings have it.
Okay, so that's a new system.
Yeah, to be honest with you, they just you have to guarantee a certain number of users in a waterless urinal to make it work properly. It's an interesting dilemma.
Okay.
Oh, is that
we can provide some more design detail for you there later.
Oh yeah, I'd love to read that study. It's an interesting concept. Okay, so these urinals will be low flow, and they'll
very low. It's a very low flow.
They'll just flush every once in a while.
Exactly.
Wow. Okay.
It's really, don't think of it so much as a flush as a sort of a rinse, but
as a rinse. Okay. Yeah. A sprinkle. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And yes, we should put solar on the libraries too.
Mr. Kingsbury, please continue.
Right. So parks, fields, and courts. This was one of the biggest areas, even though it's one of the smallest parts of the SPLOST program, where the sustainability conversation came in. We've replaced a significant number of turf fields with artificial turf. So that obviously reduces the amount of maintenance costs, mowing costs, and watering costs. We do have to irrigate them occasionally to keep down static electricity and heat, but the water use is a fraction of what it is to keep the turf growing. So this is just a quick update on all the parks, whether they got artificial turf, and I noticed there's a typo in that, interesting, and where we ran out of money or the use didn't justify it, we've replaced some of the fields, just upgrade the natural turf in some of the fields. And then we're going through an operation to resurface and renovate basketball and tennis courts throughout the system. Those contracts have all been let, and the work is underway, and we'll probably have all this work done in the parks by the end of this year. So that's a list of all the parks that have athletic field improvements and court improvements. Questions?
Commissioner Terry.
Yes, I just want to say kudos for the artificial field, because that clearly is a sustainability feature. So you said, I asked if there's any sustainability investments in here, Zach, and this is one. This counts.
Right, no. And thanks for the acknowledgement, Commissioner. Yeah, when we were discussing the original SPLOST, we were certainly attempting to build in sustainability features. Okay. We just happened not to talk in terms of solar panels at that point.
Yeah, I understand, but I just wanted to say I really appreciate this. And I think this was a really smart move. Thanks.
Thanks. The next 3 slides, I won't go on in any detail, but it's 3 pages of all the park buildings that SPLOST is touching. And it runs the gamut of replacing shelters, replacing shade structures, upgrading the concession and field buildings, that all the parks in the system that needed that based on the age of the building and the spirit of the SPLOST program, because it's picking up on deferred maintenance, picking up the renovations of the buildings that have the most users that were in the worst condition, if that makes sense. So it's a pretty wide-ranging list. And again, probably by this time next year, we've got some tentative finish dates on here. We feel confident we'll finish up all of the priority buildings the Parks Department had in their wish list when SPLOST started by the end of the program. Any specific questions about park facilities? And again, just don't hesitate to call us if you want more information.
What was the percentage, again, of what we spent on parks?
It's about $30 million out of the entire 388, so it's a relatively low percentage.
Okay.
And remember, our SPLOST has a unique feature. You're limited to 15% of the SPLOST proceeds going to non-transportation and non-public safety facilities. That's why libraries, courthouse, senior centers, health centers got relatively small budget line items. So I think SPLOST original list, Zach, was $60 or $70 million, ended up at 30 plus. So, but every dollar is appreciated.
All right, Mr. Kingsbury.
So briefly, I think these slides got out of order, but non-resurfacing transportation status, just to touch on this quickly, the $388 million we expect countywide, unincorporated, 600 plus is the entire county. 240 million of that's the transportation portion, with 150 plus million being the resurfacing. Then 25 million was set aside, which was crucial for DeKalb County, because prior to this current SPLOST, DeKalb, from my own experience as a consultant, missed out on a lot of ARC and GDOT programming because the county did not have a consistent way to ensure you had the match money. So projects would be awarded, the county couldn't come up with the match, and they were pulled out of the list. So that $25 million pot is sort of your insurance policy to ensure that when you're awarded a federal aid program, you've got the match money, and you can unequivocally say, we can accept the award because we have the match money from our SPLOST. And then the balance from those 3 pots left us $63.4 million for everything else: sidewalks, trails, safety improvements, intersection improvements, turn lanes, traffic signals. And out of that 63, we've programmed and started to construct probably about close to $30 million, about halfway through that list. And so that's sort of a snapshot of the non-resurfacing transportation projects.
Okay.
Mr. Chair.
And then in terms of the funds dedicated to state and federal match, can you share sort of what those match funds leveraged? So what do we get from the federal?
It's almost always, it's not always, it's not almost, it always is, you're all required a 20% match. So for every dollar you get from Uncle Sam, you really get 80 cents because you put in 20 cents. Okay. The other thing the SPLOST program does is it gives you the cash flow to carry those projects because they're all reimbursable.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, I was going to suggest maybe just when we notate sort of this line item, that we maybe have another little parentheses that sort of indicates how much, like, those funds did 20% match for these projects that had 80% in that total.
Matter of fact, I can, we've got that detail in the team software. Save you from having to pull, scroll through those.
In Teams? I got to go into Teams, Chris?
You got to go into Teams, but we can pull it out for you. A good example would be the federal aid sidewalks. I think the bids came in at let's say $4 million for those federal aid sidewalks. I think the SPLOST portion is about 800,000 to $1 million now, maybe a little more. Same thing with South River Trail. It was SPLOST probably put in 30% of the cost. But yeah, we can pull those numbers out for you and show you the value. Good question.
Okay, and then just a quick follow-up, Mr. Presiding Officer. So in terms of like the parts that aren't the, I guess they're maybe the federal match or these other line items, is there a way to just break out sort of what proportion of those are just going to like the scoping or a design or an engineering as opposed to like an actual,
matter of fact, we can add the columns. I sent a second file to everybody. It's a 6-page snapshot of the project schedules, and it lists the titles of the active projects. But we can certainly update that again with the detail from teams, whether we're in scoping, design, right away, construction, so forth.
Okay, and I asked because I assume that any sort of scoping or design or engineering that we're paying for in this SPLOST, the idea would be the next SPLOST would pay for the implementation of those designs. Correct,
and a lot of the current planning studies are federal aid. So your little bucket of match money is allowing you to do that planning work up front with 80% of Uncle Sam's money paying the bulk of the freight.
Okay, so maybe just as we move forward in the discussions of the future SPLOST, if we could just maybe try to calculate out what we think we're sort of, I don't want to say we're on the hook for, but if we're going to spend money on design and engineering, I assume we want to take it to the next step. So I guess, what percentage or what dollar amount do we think might, not already be spoken for in a sense? Like it's like we kind of have to take it to the next level.
And we've coordinated closely with the Kimley Horn folks and Dave Pelton and everyone at Transportation with the Comprehensive Transportation Plan update. So their numbers are part of our numbers also. So we're all sort of worked on the same page there.
Oh, that's right. Okay, gotcha. The one that Christina is leading up. Okay.
Exactly. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you.
Any more questions? This slide I meant to put this slide earlier in the deck. The LSPE program for DeKalb, I have to say, it's been an overwhelming success. And a lot of that goes to the credit of HEH being a significant portion. They've gotten $36 million in contracts. So that's 3 paving contracts in round numbers. And then all of our smaller patching and concrete projects, sidewalks to date, curb and gutter improvements and so forth, have all gone to small LSPE firms, Audico, SDC, and DAF Concrete. So everybody's, it's been a good cooperative effort between the purchasing folks, the LSPE compliance officers, office, getting the word out that we want local vendors to bid on these projects. So it's been pretty successful. I can't think of any other local government that you're close to 50% of total dollars awarded have found their way into local small businesses. It's a pretty high number.
All right, Commissioner Terry.
Yes, thank you. I had a question about the LSPE program. So is the policy, if a LSPE is a prime contractor, that any subcontracting work doesn't necessarily have to be an LSPE subcontractor?
Correct. The value of the contract, the bulk of it goes to the prime. So they've
okay, so in the case of a prime contractor that wasn't an LSPE, there would be the assumption that up to 20% of that contract would have to have LSPE participation.
Right, and some of the paving contracts have actually exceeded that because the majority of their trucking sub-consultants, hauling sub-consultants are local small business enterprises that provide the transportation back and forth.
Okay, thanks.
All right, Mr. Kingsbury, what else?
So Zach reminded me when we went over the slide deck earlier this week to add two items that have sort of been informally discussed. So the next slide is beautification elements. We get a lot of questions about enhancements and so forth. So real quickly, from our perspective, those are elements you would add to a base project, for instance, and be landscape medians, gateway signage, wayfinding signage, monuments, streetscape elements, furniture, lighting, and so forth. And they typically, sometimes they're part and parcel of the design. Sometimes they're things you'd like to have over and above the project's base objectives. Having said that, the possible sources of funding enhancements in the current SPLOST are obviously the 1B items. Many of those projects, for instance, Rockbridge Road and the streetscape elements, have enhancements embedded in the design, if that makes sense. So the 1B matching money has allowed us to add in some enhancements to projects. There are a lot of opportunities in the sidewalk and pedestrian 1C, D, and H, but we've got to balance in adding enhancements to a project increases the cost. And the trade-off might be if the need is, say, in a neighborhood to have a mile of new sidewalk, that's a base sidewalk of just 5 feet wide, and maybe the grass strip behind the curb were eligible, were available. And if we start to add in a lot of other features, different pavements, wider sidewalk, decorative lighting, we could have more elements in the project, but get fewer linear feet of improvements. And then there was a bucket of money that's under discussion right now. Item 1J was corridor beautification. And the first request for that was Georgia DOT is replacing 3 bridges on 285 in advance of their major mobility project to add the HOV lanes in the future. And the county asked, could we get decorative fencing similar to what's on Memorial Drive? And Georgia DOT said yes, but we'd expect you to pay the cost. So that was about $370,000 appropriation from a year or two ago. Those bridges are under construction, and the contractor came back and said they need another potentially $500,000. We're still trying to get the final number to change out the parapet wall to make it a more architectural feature. So we don't have a final number there. So that'll be sort of half of that $1.25 million line item. And then there's the final category, which is sort of at discretion of each commissioner, would be the commission district funds, the discretionary funds for transportation, $1 million per commission district. So that's sort of a snapshot of beautification issues to start the discussion rolling.
Okay. With that, thank you, Chris. Appreciate those updates. Commissioner Terry, followed by Commissioner Rader.
Thank you, Mr. Presiding Officer. So if GDOT, if we weren't paying for the fancy fencing on the interstate bridge, would GDOT just put up like a little chain link fence? I mean, what is their standard right now?
Yeah, you're exactly right. Chain link fence and a cast in place smooth barrier wall. So
okay, and someone has to remind me, because I feel like at the Memorial Drive Bridge, there is that decorative fencing, but they put a chain link fence through it. I guess maybe to prevent people from dropping things over the interstate bridge. So I'm just, am I right about that? Do they still put a chain link thing?
No, it's an aluminum picket fence, and
okay.
There's some chain link fence at the corners, I believe, but no, the bulk of them, it's an aluminum picket fence and that's the architectural relief. They've changed their design standards since they built Memorial Drive, and we're trying to figure out how we can get something similar on the new bridges.
Okay, and then you said the parapet wall. Is that just the little sound barrier?
Same thing. No, it's technically called a parapet wall because it's built on top of the structure of the bridge deck. So that's the wall the bridge is on, the fence is on top of.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. So it's only just the 2 bridges, which I think they're doing, like they're actively building.
It's 3, right, yeah. It's a Red Wing, Covington, and
oh, Red Wing. Okay.
And
Covington. Well, it was Red Wing right next to Covington, or what's the road next to Covington?
That might have been Red Wing.
Okay, so Covington, Red Wing, and what was the other one?
Austin, I believe. Which is that? No, Austin's the one next to Covington. Red Wing is.
Yeah, that's right. Austin's next to Covington. Okay. All right, I can't remember where Red Wing is. Sorry, but okay. So, but Austin and Covington are being done right now.
Correct.
Okay.
I can double check the location of the 3rd and the construction status. And the other thing is that concrete wall is also the barrier wall. So if a car in an accident leaves the roadway, that's the structural element that keeps it from leaving the bridge and landing on the interstate below.
Okay, gotcha. And then I want to just mention something that I've been working on. I think I've told everyone about it a few times, but last year I began to have discussions with Chris DeGracie, who's the landscape director for GDOT.
Right.
He runs the wildflower program, among other things, with the GDOT program. And so for about 9 months now, I've been working with different lawyers to try to get an MOA that says that we can partner with GDOT and provide more wildflower plantings in the right seasons, usually a spring and a fall planting, just for basic beautification efforts. Some of the wildflowers that we have arranged for them to be planted, like they're going to do 78 and 285 interchange for this fall, are being paid for out of the wildflower license plate fund.
Correct.
However, there's very little money in that because very few people buy the wildflower license plate. I've spoken with the tax commissioner's office. They are willing to do if we pay for it, to do a promotional flyer advocating for DeKalb residents to, when they renew their license, to pay another $20 or so to get the wildflower plate. And while we can't earmark it for DeKalb, if we show more participation in DeKalb, it allows us to make the argument for more plantings in DeKalb. And so what I want to kind of get us to consider is, as we're doing these architectural enhancements, I think the next piece of that is gateway enhancements. It's letting people know that they've entered into a jurisdiction. Cities do this really well because usually they only have like 4 entrances into a city sometimes. And so it sort of becomes like, oh, you're leaving the county and you're now in a city, right? We don't really have that feel in unincorporated DeKalb County. You don't know that you've entered DeKalb County unless you see the little sign, well, DeKalb County on just the green GDOT sign. And so I just think that when we think about beautification, we just need to take it, the next step is we need to do landscaping, or the easiest is just do some wildflowers twice a year. That's just the cheapest way to do it. And you just mow it the rest of the time. And then just some sort of signage that says, you're in DeKalb, welcome to DeKalb. I mean, we can do artistic renderings. We could, ask the community to give input, give some ownership to nearby neighbors, but something just to kind of put a place on where we are and what we represent. And I think those are 2 beautification elements that would really go a long way. I know signs are a lot more expensive. They're probably on the same accord as the architectural fencing. But those are the other beautification elements I think we should be thinking about, as we move forward.
All right, thank you, Commissioner Terry. Commissioner Rader.
Thank you. I want to speak to and ask a question about how we're able to actually get response on nominations to such projects. So these 3 GDOT projects appeared on our agenda. Apparently the SPLOST team decided that they were a worthy use of this fund. But at the same time, it seems when commissioners nominate projects and want to advance them, those proposals kind of fall into a black hole. Now, the exception to that I know of is Commissioner Gannon pressed for trail money to be spent at the Donzie landfill. And to a certain extent, staff resisted that, but the Board of Commissioners ultimately approved it. And, I think that we all have some ideas for gateways and projects within our community. We, make detailed proposals to the administration, but then for whatever reason, we can't seem to get them to come forward with either an evaluation or just for consideration by the Board of Commissioners. So insofar as it is the Commission's responsibility to select the order of capital improvements in the county, I'd just like to know if they're outside of the $1 million is a more formal way that we can actually get items onto the agenda for consideration in these various pots of money. Because, whether it is sidewalks or multi-use trails or beautification, I think that we all have ideas of places where we believe that, money could potentially have high impact. But again, once you propose those to the SPLOST team, you never really hear back on them. You propose them again, you have a conversation, but you can't ever seem to get past that point to a decision. So I'd like to know, both from, perhaps other members of the board as well as the administration, is exactly how do you push a project forward outside of the way that Commissioner Gannon did it, which I guess was to individually author a resolution and put it on the agenda in order to commit those funds.
Commissioner Rader, I could make a suggestion, and I think, and as you were talking, I'm trying to think through, okay, how do we accommodate this or accomplish this? Is we can take the ideas, and then, Chris and his team can kind of do the necessary investigation or exploration, and then we can come back, at a future meeting and just go through them and then kind of talk pros, cons, and, get your final thoughts.
Have other commissioners identified projects that they would like to see? Have other commissioners identified projects that they'd like to see, funded through SPLOST funds?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't know that we've solicited that. So that's, Chris, do you know?
No, the project that comes to mind, Mr. Rader, that I know you've asked for multiple times, we've done a lot of research on it, is the Druid Hills Gateway at CSX Railroad Bridge over Ponce. And what everybody wanted was to get the height restriction signs off of the bridge and put in the warning system in advance, and then work with obviously the railroads to give us permission. It just got to be, we can circle back and look at it again. The system to take the signs off the bridge and put in the remote warning signs further up the road in each direction was going to be quite expensive. GDOT wasn't adverse to doing it. They've done it before. We're familiar with other systems, but it could have become a $500,000 project.
Well,
certainly that's a possible thing to discuss with the remainder of the gateway money.
Right, but my point being is that, that's all sort of conversation. And whereas y'all may have done some discussion about it, I don't think that any of this is documented so that we can go back to GDOT and find out, exactly what's happening within this context, if there are any alternative ways to do it. I mean, if you're looking at that particular project, the damn warning signs don't work anyway. I mean, they're not, other than the yellow shields, there is no electrification of those signs. You go out there today and they don't flash or anything. But I don't ever get any formal feedback on a project. I don't get a report. And we don't have a list of projects and priorities, whether it, again, is beautification is certainly an important category and one that I asked for a report on today. But it also goes to these other areas where there may be, specific sidewalk projects or trail projects that are high impact within an area that, commissioners, I mean, we're all in our districts all the time, and we are working hard to respond to the priorities of our constituents. When we do so, we basically feel as though, well, I ran it up the flagpole, but you can't see above the clouds on the flagpole. Unfortunately, you don't know whether that flag is going to fly or not. So that's what I'm asking for, is a process by which we as members of the Board of Commissioners can look at these categories, propose projects for them, and see if we can get some concurrence on how we would, prioritize projects, because otherwise you simply get projects appearing on the agenda and there's no clear indication about what the opportunity cost in other projects is when that particular project is selected. And so, my fear is that we're going to get projects proposed through the SPLOST team and the administration for their priorities. And then at the end of that process, it's going to be announced, oh, that money's all tapped out. Sorry about those things that you had suggested a year ago. So that's what I'm trying to do, is get a little bit more. I mean, all of these resources are scarce. There's going to be apparently some chance that some roads won't get repaved. You know, I hope that we commit to doing the arterials, because I'm firmly convinced that those are the roads that most people experience, as opposed to cul-de-sacs or other things like that. But I still don't feel as though we really get any role in prioritization, except approving the priorities that have been selected by the SPLOST team and the administration, because there is no process to aggregate and compare them.
So I'll just make a suggestion, Commissioner Rader, as it relates to what the beautification. We can prepare like a form or something like that. We want to give it so that everyone can have an opportunity to, you know, if you have thoughts, you know, let's put them down, or ideas, and then we can evaluate them and bring them back and have a, you know, discussion at a upcoming meeting.
Yeah, I just don't understand where, for instance, these 3 fences, I mean, if we don't even know where Red Wing is, are we sure that we want to spend that kind of money on decorative fences? I mean, I guess you all think you do, but, you know, I mean, I'm not sure that if we don't know where it is, that makes sense as in terms of that. But, you know, you put it on the agenda and, you know, people vote for it because they think that somehow it has been ranked and prioritized, but we don't even know what other folks are suggesting for things. So, you know, I just would like to see some process by which we can be involved in prioritization, since that is, you know, our responsibility as members of the Board of Commissioners.
Understood. And Chris will get out a form, and then we'll have it at a future meeting, a more thorough discussion. And that's kind of with the sidewalks. I remember we had these type of discussions. We provided a pretty detailed report. Yeah, and then that's what we're working on.
Yeah, but then it went to ground, right? Okay. But then that went to ground when we couldn't, apparently we wouldn't that we weren't completely satisfied with the report, then all of a sudden that went away. Likewise with the work on prioritizing trails. Both of those were the subject of y'all's proposals, but then when we got our hands on them, all of a sudden they dropped off the radar screen.
Okay.
I mean, I don't know if anybody else sees this, but I just feel as though we're getting fed this on a bit by bit basis, but we don't know how much is left in terms of opportunity cost in these projects. And then at the end of it, you know, I've been telling people for a very long time, I'm trying to get that beautification process project done. You have prioritized 3 decorative fences for $500,000, but apparently deprioritized this other project that you're now suggesting would cost the same amount. So, I mean, how do we know that is that, I mean, they're comparative choices. They're not absolute choices because the money's not unlimited.
Great points, Commissioner Rader. I would remind everyone, my understanding of the decorative fence issue for the 3 bridges, that was a design build effort the Georgia DOT let to design build contractor replace those 3 bridges, Red Wing, Austin, Covington. The DOT came back to the county, and I forget who initiated it, and said, if you want anything different than the standard, you need to pay now. And the county, y'all were brought an agenda item to put the decorative fencing up. And then I think maybe wasn't quite because it's design build, things happen quickly. The state came back and said, oh, we'll also need more money to give you the decorative parapet wall. And at first we had an agenda item, we think we pulled it this week. It was $300 and some odd thousand for that wall. Contractor came back and said, no, it's probably gonna be close to 500. So it's this 3-way conversation. But I guess the point is that wasn't something anybody anticipated. It was because of the way the state let the contract, it was be a lost opportunity. If you didn't participate now, you'd get the chain link fence and the smooth concrete wall.
Well, that's all well and good, but you can still see that this does, and you know, I mean, early on in this process, we were asking for complete project lists, and you know, said it was premature to do that. But now we're approaching the end of this SPLOST program. And at some point, we need to recognize that the funds are not unlimited and that we're going to have to make some trade-offs in terms of how we expend those funds. And I just think that it's time to, start recognizing that, look at some metrics, look at where the projects that we have done have been done, look at, what priorities have been implemented and what priorities remain to be implemented, and start making some reasonable decisions, because the demand for projects is very high, but the resources are somewhat limited. I mean, you're going to later on talk about lifting, changing the SPLOST law in order to allow more projects, but clearly we haven't exhausted the priorities within the existing restricted list. But now we're talking about maybe moving on and opening it up to a larger number of projects. And I think that, we need to have a better scope on what remains to be done, and then start making some policy decisions on that, rather than just making decisions that ultimately represent policy, but are made on a more project by project, up or down type of a basis. So again, I just think it's time to do it. We're closing in on the end of it. And there just has not been a great, we approved, some number of categories, by a relatively close vote. But then we really haven't come back and talked at all about the spending within those categories and other prioritization, other than the, sort of the rubric that the administration and its consultant is using. Because, Mr. Kingsbury, you're responsible to Zach Williams and to the administration, not necessarily to the Board of Commissioners. So I'm just hoping that we can recognize that we're now in the final quarter, and that we need to have, a strategy to get to the end of it and go on to the next one.
Mr. Kingsbury, if there's a way to address Commissioner Rader's concerns in time for our next SPLOST meeting.
What we'll do, all commissioners, is the report Jeff talks about was the 21 sidewalk and trails list. We prioritized about 100 projects we evaluated. I guess maybe with the missing link in hindsight was, while it was presented and discussed, it was never voted on. So perhaps we will update that current cost. And there have been some requests, North Decatur Road, for instance, with Ted Terry. We've started to look at programming that in. So yeah, next meeting, we'll bring that 21 list back with some updated costs and let you say yay or nay on the prioritization. We can just sort it out then.
Well, in the multi-use trail list had an evaluation rubric that in some cases had errors in it, mischaracterized.
I believe we tried to correct those. That's another discussion separate from the sidewalks, because the majority of that money is going toward the two existing trails. The one that was completed, the designs are being completed, and the right of way is underway at Old Castle. But we'll pull all those details, and that'd be probably the focus of the next meeting.
Right, and solicit information on beautification.
Right, but let's bear in mind that this thing ends in April 2024, right?
So the collections end March of 2024. The money stays in the SPLOST 1 account.
I know it does, but I'm just saying that we would be moving on another SPLOST. We'd have to put this on the ballot and go again, and people are going to want to kind of know what they get for their money. Okay, so anyway, I appreciate y'all, considering this, but we're just sort of the proverbial frogs in the rapidly boiling pot, and we're not really recognizing that at the end, when finally the money runs out, there's going to be stuff that isn't done. So thank you.
All right, thank you, Commissioner Rader. I acknowledge Commissioner Terry's next, followed by Commissioner Marita Davis-Johnson. Also just want to say, if it's possible, it'd be nice if we could sort of wrap up these questions by 11:30, 11:35, because I do want to dedicate some time talking about the next phase in our SPLOST discussions for what comes after this existing SPLOST. Commissioner Terry, please go ahead.
Mr. Presiding Officer, and yeah, appreciate the opportunity to discuss all these things. I do think that Commissioner Rader's point is well taken because I think the as we talk about future SPLOST, just getting a little bit more of a responsive feedback loop, I think, especially when there are line items in the current SPLOST and future SPLOST that might sort of be, we'll decide later. There might be categories, but how we actually spend them might not necessarily be known at the moment. And so, yeah, just to kind of, sort of be responsive in a democratic republic, we have to, every year something, might change, something might be different. So having that flexibility to respond, and it sounds like if GDOT was like, you got one shot to do this, that was sort of the moment to say, well, let's just take it, because coming back later and installing a new fence probably would cost more money. So I do agree, a more responsive feedback loop. I think obviously if we're having quarterly SPLOST meetings and that mixed with our citizen advisory board, which I will say for my appointee, he resigned because he's like, what's the point of the SPLOST committee? He's like, we don't do anything. And so, I know it's an oversight committee, but I think that the public's perception is that there'd be some sort of give and take and some sort of, participatory kind of budgeting element of it. So I just think if we even create the space for our appointees to, whether it's through us or with us, to ask that question of, okay, so we do have some beautification line items, some other line items that are still to be considered. Let's get some input. Let's talk about it. I mean, I think ultimately the only concern of sort of a decision being made over here, and then it is brought to our realm, and we have to sort of say yes or no. It forestalls and stymies any changes or even minor tweaks in some cases. I personally don't like the Memorial Drive fence, design. That's just my personal artistic opinion. I don't think it looks very good at all. But that just might be what's available right now. So I think just any sort of opportunity for a co-creative process, it just means everyone has a little bit to say. And of course, not everyone's going to get what they want. But if people feel like they didn't get any input at all, then it's just a reason to say, well, what's the point of even participating? And I don't like it when I got a resident that like spent 8 months, kind of banging his head against the wall and just being like, what's the point of this committee? The SPLOST committee, that is. On the point of GDOT, I think we need to have a lobbying strategy for GDOT. I feel like there's a lot of things that they do or don't do, or just don't even respond to. Like it just goes into a black hole. And we have 3 board members that represent DeKalb, and we know who our GDOT, point people are sort of in the bureaucracy. But I've even noticed that the board members of GDOT sometimes don't know what GDOT's doing. Kind of like sometimes board members here don't know what we're doing necessarily. It's not saying it's, they don't want to know or they don't need to know, but I think that we just need to, we spent a lot of money on lobbyists. We've got two contractors that lobby, I guess federal and state, but I think in that state category, I don't know if we need to amend the next contract or if we need just to have a strategy, but I think if we ask our GDOT board members to work with us on some of these things, having a beautification strategy for DeKalb County should be a top priority because we have the most miles of interstate. I mean, GDOT has a huge presence in DeKalb County, and there should be some give and take there. As they're doing projects, there should be some coming to the minds, not, oh, hey, if you want to do this, you got 30 days to respond, go for it. It's just not, it's just not an appropriate way to interact within intergovernmental relations. Coming to us at the last minute. Last point I'll make is, and it was mentioned in the slide, beautification, each commissioner gets $1 million. So I feel like the assumption of that slide was, well, commissioners, why don't you beautify with your money? But $1 million ain't enough. $1 million out of what percentage is it? It's like less than 1%, right? Of the total revenues.
Yeah, that'd be 1/3 of 1%.
1/3 of 1%. It's like 0.2, I think it's 0.26%. So, and then of course, if you're a new commissioner and you come in, the previous commissioner spent all their $1 million on like literally one project, then your constituents are looking at you being like, can you do this? And I'm like, no, because there's literally no money was already spent. So, as we look at future SPLOSTs, I think a more appropriate, maybe a more equitable policy would be, instead of just saying $1 million per district over the entire life of the SPLOST, is we recognize that every year there might be a clear and present challenge or opportunity that might emerge, that having those discretionary funds allows us to be more nimble and agile to react. Because let's be honest, if we have to go through this iterative co-creation process every quarter through the administration's SPLOST project list, then we will always be 3 months behind or hopefully ahead if we're smart, but we might always actually be behind. And so I think a more appropriate policy would be to say that there should be at least a minimum of $1 million a year. And each year that $1 million becomes available for each commission district to respond in the clear and present moment of what we're dealing with. Because District 6 has a lot of SPLOST priorities that aren't on the list, but are things that people are raising their hand and say, please, can you fix this? And sometimes they're like $50,000 expenses. They're just like minor things. So that's all I'll say on that.
Okay, I was just going to say, some of the things that you're mentioning might be good for our next portion of our discussion.
That's right.
And just compartmentalize those for a few moments. Commissioner Davis Johnson.
Yeah, I'd like to say a couple of things. And of course, we impaneled the SPLOST Citizens Advisory Group, which gave recommendations as to priorities. Now, I would think that if, just in my particular appointees, it's a Democratic group, and so, one person does not decide. So if a person feels, and so we have the bulk, if not 95% plus, of that committee still intact. And, I think it's pretty obvious throughout DeKalb what has happened with SPLOST funds since the beginning. Now, do we want to reallocate? What I would like to see is where we are with the list that was prioritized. And if somebody feels that they can't work with other members on that committee, or they feel that their point is not being received, and if they're resigned, that's their prerogative. If I've had one to leave and I reappointed someone else because it's a Democratic group, but you can't indict the whole advisory group because someone threw up their hands and say, well, my thoughts are not getting put in, my suggestions, and so I'm leaving. That's a person's prerogative to do so. But I would like to see.
We lost you, Commissioner.
Yep.
Commissioner, you're on mute for somehow. Commissioner Rita Davis Johnson, if you could unmute, please.
Yeah, so I'd like to see what we have left in our priorities and then see where we're headed with that by the end of this particular SPLOST here. But to indict the entire SPLOST advisory board because someone may disagree or feel that their views are the views and should be, that's the person's individual prerogative. But, I think that we have been shown what the SPLOST funds are being utilized for. We got discretionary funds to utilize in our district, what we want to do with those funds. And so how we utilize those are pretty much our discretion. And so, but the whole SPLOST City Advisory Group advise us, and I would think that, of course we can alter that, but they have given us the direction in which the citizens want us to go. And so we have to give consideration to that. So I'd just like to see where we are on those priorities, how we look to get there, where we're going to be deficient, and move from there as well. But, that's what we have the advisory group for. And it's a democracy. And the people vote for the chair, they vote for the chair, and they have orderly meetings. And, like any democracy, is based on the majority rules. And so, so I'd like to see us move from there. I think that DeKalb has done a great job in administering these funds. Is there not room for improvement? Of course, but to insinuate that the majority of the citizens are not happy with our SPLOST program, I would not, I'd have to see a poll on that because I would not totally agree. We have citizen input. And so pretty much those are my remarks. I'd like to see where we are and we move from there. But this is something that the citizens has given us direction on. We've taken that direction and, do we tweak it? Yes, but you got your discretionary funds and you use them as you so fit. And anything else should come back to the board if we need to tweak something, but we're not the administration. We don't decide what projects. This is, we are the board. We give policy, we give direction. I agree with that. But, our discretionary funds are that, discretionary. Okay, I'm pretty much good.
Thank you, Commissioner Davis Johnson. Commissioner Terry, followed by Chief Operating Officer Williams. Oh, you just muted yourself. There you go.
No comments.
No comment. Okay. All right. Thank you, Commissioner Terry. Zach and Chris, anything else to add before we move on to the next step?
Right. So
one quick thing. Yeah, Zach.
Yeah, as you move on, Mr. Presiding Officer, I was just going to remind everyone, we sent out the project schedule, which has the status of each of the projects. Between now and the next meeting, I think Chris and I will make sure that we make an effort to, just kind of touch base with each of you, to make sure that we're, have, the right understanding of where we're headed. And we will also solicit input on beautification elements. And at the next discussion, I would anticipate we will further the discussion on or revisit this discussion on sidewalks and trails. I think that will kind of, put, some sort of a seal or a stamp on some of these items that we continue to discuss.
Okay. All right. Okay. Well, with that being said, the next phase or the next slide that Mr. Kingsbury has prepared for us is displayed right here. And of course, we can all read this. Mr. Kingsbury, though, if you wouldn't mind walking us through this. And of course, I think point by point, commissioners will probably have questions, and I think it's appropriate we allow the floor to open up the conversation for that. So please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Patrick. I put this in after talking to Zach, I called it SPLOST 2 considerations. We've touched a lot of these issues in the conversations this morning. The new capital facilities, that's something we hear discussion from various folks, Clyde Stovall's group and so forth. the library director, the parks director would like, everybody like new facilities. And we're all aware of that 15% cap. So that's something to carry forth the discussions on. Obviously, those projects, everybody's would like more rec centers, more buildings, court facilities are a need. And of course, public safety, we're not going to get every new fire station that the chief wants. And there were elements of the fire station renovations we had to prioritize, i.e. we put new roofs on all the buildings first. And then there were projects like upgrading doors and equipment upgrades that this SPLOST couldn't get to. So there would be elements to consider for the next SPLOST. And then down the transportation elements, as I mentioned earlier, there's the comprehensive transportation plan has a tiered list of what I think you've seen presentations that'll come to you for a vote later this year of the long-term strategy and short-term, medium and long-range projects in the county. And obviously SPLOST funds make up some of those funding sources. We would certainly consider discussing with you the resurfacing program is something the county's needed. I don't think it's ever going to go away. We would like to consider for discussion in future meetings, more money going to pavement rehabilitation. Costs more, but gets you a longer wearing surface. And that sort of goes back to the arterial discussions Mr. Rader's concerned about. And then one of the things we've had conversations with this group and one-on-one is many counties are moving toward countywide asset management programs that create some electronic tagging of all their assets, especially in the transportation corridor. So it's everything from right-of-way to right-of-way lines. So it's overhanging vegetation, guardrails, sidewalks, curb ramps, pavement conditions, lighting, striping, all the things that are in the roadway system you're responsible for. So that's something that perhaps the next SPLOST program could address. So just threw those out there for get y'all's discussion going, and we'll sit back and listen, take notes.
Okay. Well, commissioners, I'll open the floor up for any discussion. I guess the first point was changed in enabling legislation to remove the 15% cap for non-transportation or public safety projects. Is there any comments or thoughts? Commissioner Rader? Followed by Commissioner Terry.
Okay. The DeKalb SPLOST is unique in the state of Georgia, as so much else is in DeKalb. But I think actually the most unique part of it, and the part that needs the most focus, is this notion that the SPLOST is tied to the assessment freeze. I think that that dynamic basically holds our homeowners hostage to approving this SPLOST on a iterative basis, regardless of whether or not they believe that the money is well spent or not. And I think that's an important disconnect in responsibility to the voters. If we were to not approve a SPLOST referendum in 2024, every homesteaded property owner, well, many homesteaded property owners, probably not everyone, but soon everyone, the way that property values are inflating, would soon see their assessment literally explode on them. And I think that, we need to continue to recognize that SPLOST has to be a service not to us and not to our particular aspirations, but to public aspiration. And insofar as the public doesn't really have much of a choice if they want to keep their assessment freeze, I think that if there were anything done on the SPLOST, it would be that we would break that link between the assessment freeze and the renewal of the SPLOST. So, that's not on your list, but I think it's an important one. Beyond that, I think that we need to have a comprehensive assessment of our deferred maintenance before we start incurring new maintenance of public facilities. I mean, one of the reasons that we got into a hole on deferred maintenance is because using the bond issues that we had, we started to increase our obligations for for maintaining facilities, but there was no dedicated source of money for that maintenance. And so we have a big backlog, and I would like to see a comprehensive assessment, and that goes to that asset management strategy that Mr. Kingsbury alluded to. I mean, as it relates to road services, we still got a guy that goes out and visually inspects roads, and that's how we determine the priority for investment in road maintenance. And that is an obsolete way of going. But, you know, apparently we can't move beyond that because we don't have any money invested in asset management in the county. And I think that it's something that needs to be done. So I am still very leery of starting new projects with SPLOST until we get our maintenance backlog corrected, and that we can look at ourselves at some sort of a level of equilibrium when it comes to maintaining the existing system. So I yield back, but those are my priorities.
Thank you, Commissioner Rader. If you don't mind, just a quick follow-up to staff. Do we have an idea of what it would take to get this asset management strategy up and running?
Yeah, we can revisit the white paper. It just range from the low millions to many millions, depending on how sophisticated you want to get. And it also entails at some level a deep dive into operational organization of the county departments. But we can certainly update that paper from when we started the program.
Yeah, we'd done some work about 3 years ago on it, Commissioner.
Okay, all right. Thank you. Commissioner Terry, I see your hand is raised.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Presiding Officer. A couple points that I'll get to. I think when we talk about the resurfacing program and future years, I want to see if we can, whether through the legislation or just through our own intergovernmental relations with the municipalities, work on, you know, I don't know if they're joint ventures or joint contracts. And I know that in our transportation plan, we're contemplating how our transportation plans interact with municipal transportation plans. And so any opportunity to see alignment over the next 7 years where it's a major arterial or even a neighborhood road, if the city's planning to do one thing and we're planning to do another thing and they meet, let's go ahead and just get them all into the same contract. Let's do them together. The worst thing I've noticed over the years is a city will pave up to a line, and then maybe the county eventually will get it, or vice versa. The county will come up to the city, and the city says, "Well, we're doing that in year 5 or whatever." So I think from a citizen perspective, all they see is like, "Why can't you guys talk to each other? Like, why are we doing this? At different times? Why are we paving one time and tearing it up the other day?" So coordination on the resurfacing, because I imagine that resurfacing still needs to be a priority in the SPLOST, because I think we still have a long list to go. I do believe that the SPLOST priorities need to align with our economic development and land use planning. I think we are seeing this manifest in the Unified Development Plan. I think that there's a lot of ties that are connecting our new regional centers, neighborhood centers, and then even our new residential category that we're considering in terms of land use, which would be, in essence, a little bit more dense than the suburban character area. But we quite literally can't change those land use designations if we don't build the infrastructure to do it. And so by the very principle that we actually would see our own digest growth restrained simply because we had not done the requisite infrastructure work that, quite frankly, the private market needs to justify, in essence, what appears to be, on average of a 10-fold increase in investment from their end. A shining example of this paradigm is in some of the smaller cities. I think about Duluth as sort of a very micro example where it was a sleepy downtown. It was sort of, had kind of developed into, or just didn't really go anywhere. And the simple investment of a public realm walking and biking facilities, a town square, leverage tenfold economic and private development around that public realm. And so if you look at our neighborhood centers, our regional centers, those are our town squares. Those are our city centers, right? We can't have one city center in DeKalb, we're too large, but every neighborhood has their, almost every neighborhood literally is within a 10-minute walk of a major commercial area, but there might not be a sidewalk, there might not be a bike lane, there might not be the appropriate public realm when they walk to that shopping center, because quite frankly, it's just asphalt. And so essence of what I think we're talking about need to be sort of guided by the principle that we live in suburbia. Suburbia is incredibly inefficient and costly. We know the tax base and the tax digest does not pay for paving. That's why we have to do it in SPLOST. The property taxes don't pay for all the maintenance of this. SPLOST, it pays for part of it, but not all of it. So there's an inequity and imbalance there. And so the point I'm trying to get to is that as we do these next round, if we strategically invest in the walking, biking, and then in some cases the car and transit infrastructure, that investment will yield tenfold investment in our tax digest. I think to that point of the facilities, this is sort of the other point here, because I think the only concern I have with building new facilities is that then we have to operate them. And if there is a plan within our general fund budget to fund those operations, then that's great, that's gravy. But if we still don't know how we're going to fund the operations of new park facilities, new fire stations, new public safety facilities, libraries, all those things, then we are quite essence, spending tax money and then saying we have to spend even more tax money down the line in the future. But I think that we could, I think you can do a both and, but I do see the infrastructure as continuing to be the top of the list, but not necessarily in, I think, what I saw in the last SPLOST, which seemed to be sort of a road by road analysis. It seemed to be a very sort of, this road is a bad condition, so therefore it's the first to be paved. I think that we need to weight our formula more so into, is that investment going to lead to more economic investment in that area? Because if it does, then we have paid for that investment just by virtue of allowing that private development to happen. And then the last thing I'll mention is just the biking and walking facilities. I think that this has been the top thing I've seen in the survey from the Unified Development Plan. We definitely are putting a lot of the money in road projects. But again, if we tailor our approach to expanding the public realm, expanding the walking and biking infrastructure, and then Commissioner Patrick, I applaud you for bringing up the traffic count study and sort of that analysis and the sidewalk analysis, because that quite literally will tell us where those gaps are. And if we fill those gaps, then we are opening up new avenues of commercial, basic customer base for future, businesses or developments. So there's kind of like a synergy here. And I think that if we can put more of that mindset into some of these projects, then we could leverage these funds to even produce even greater results. Thank you.
Commissioner Terry, I'd just follow up with that. Again, thank you for mentioning the sidewalk and traffic counts. I think those are important. There has to be another way to assure commissioners that even some of the, I'll say, areas that haven't received the attention that they need can be valued up as well. So hopefully that's something that staff can come up with a formula for us to address that. With that said, are there any other suggestions or comments? Commissioners Cochran Johnson, Commissioner Rita Davis Johnson. You're good. Okay. All right. All right. Well, with that said, I hope that this is a good starting point in our conversation. I know, I hope CEO was with us on this one, and I know Zach Williams will definitely report back what we have discussed today. I took down about 5 or 6 good points, I think, that were mentioned here during our discussions, and I look forward to us working those back into our next meeting that we have. Zach, do you have any other comments or input?
No, Commissioner, I think I was taking notes as well. And so what you and I can do at the conclusion, or, after this, we'll just compare notes, and then Chris can circulate back to the board a summation of this discussion.
Okay. All right.
That work?
That works for me. Commissioners, unless there's anything else on your hearts or minds, I'll ask for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All right. Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Commissioner Raiders Davis Johnson, for that second. Hands and aye. All those in support, please say aye. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Commissioner Raiders, back as well. Appreciate you guys. Enjoy the day.